Wonderful. I just want to welcome everybody. Good evening. And my name's Susie Merriam. I am the Community Development Director for the City of Watsonville. And this is a really exciting time for us here in the city as we embark on the 2050 General Plan update. The city, as you all may remember, may not, for those of you who are newer to the city, we did embark on a 2030 general plan update in 2003, which was really embroiled in legal challenges, and the city finally set aside that plan for good in 2016. Because of this, we have been operating using the 2005 general plan that was adopted in 1994. So it had a great vision up until the year 2005. Short story, or the short moral of the story, is that we really need a refreshed community vision and a roadmap for the next 30 years. I'm going to keep it brief tonight. We've got a lot to go over and a great team to present. I want to thank you again for taking the time to join us tonight in the first community workshop on the general plan. There's going to be a lot of other ways to contribute to this effort over the next about 2.5 years. And I hope that you stick with us throughout this entire process and all the way through to the end. And I will pass this off to Justin Meek, our principal planner and manager of this huge undertaking. So Justin, why don't you take it away?
Right before that, we'll have Celia come on and
that's right.
Our Spanish interpretation real quick.
Yes, sorry.
Buenas tardes, gracias por acompañarnos. Para interpretación en español, la interpretación es simultáneo para esta reunión. Se dará en los siguientes idiomas: español bajo la opción de español. Por favor, haz clic en el icono interpretación en tu barra de herramientas para acceder al idioma deseado. De nuevo, para la interpretación en español, bajo la opción español, por favor, haz clic en el icono interpretación en tu barra de herramientas para acceder al idioma deseado. Gracias.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. I'm Susan Harden. I'm a member of the project team. Justin's going to walk through some introductions of other members in just a moment, but just wanted to do a few other Zoom introductions before we jump into the meeting. And just a few other housekeeping notes. We are recording this meeting, and that will be available to others in the community who aren't able to attend this evening. As noted, we have Spanish translation. We'll be documenting your input primarily through a tool called Mentimeter, and it's kind of an online polling tool, which we'll introduce in a few minutes here, and also through the Zoom chat. So we really encourage you to use the chat. It's highlighted there on the right side of your screen. Feel free at any time to put questions in there or comments or ideas, specifically, or especially if you're having trouble with other ways to participate. So we definitely want to hear from you. And all perspectives are welcome. We also ask that everyone is just respectful of each other's ideas, especially at this early stage in the process. All ideas are welcome and encouraged here tonight. Go to the next slide, Monica. So just here is a few other the icons that you might see on the bottom of your screen. And we already identified the interpretation note there too. There's the chat button. We may use the raise hand towards the end of the meeting, but primarily, as I noted, we'll try to stick with the chat and the tool that we have for virtual, just so that we can hear from as many people as possible. We think we'll have some time at the end of the session for definitely for people to be able to do that as well. And then just a note, if you could keep your microphone on mute when you're not during the presentation, that would be really helpful. We encourage you to keep your video on. We'd love to see everyone's faces. So if you're comfortable with your video on, please do that. And then we do have some contact information. If you are having technical difficulties, there is an email address there for you to email. We can try to help you with some of the Zoom capabilities on your end, or if you're having other kinds of difficulties as well, we can try to help you with that, or Celia can help you with that. So definitely use that email. And if you later on find that you're having trouble and you can't remember that email, just paste into the chat and we'll make sure you get that. All right, and with that, I will turn it over to Justin to do some more introductions.
Thank you, Susan. I'm Justin Meek with the City of Watsonville, and I'll be helping manage this effort. I just want to take a moment to highlight the many key staff that are part of this effort and part of the consultant team. So you just met Susan Harden with Circle Point. Also with the group is Monica, who's doing a lot of the scenes behind the scenes with Mentimeter and the slides. So I want to acknowledge them. And of course, the main effort for this group is with David Sargent and Juan Gomez-Melvi. They're with Sargent Town Planning, and they're the key consultants that's helping with the overall update of the general plan. Susan gave a warm introduction, and of course, on the city side, we also have Elena and Celia, again, we couldn't hold this meeting without their efforts, along with Carlos Landaveri, who's providing translation services right now, as well as Alvaro, who's helping out with monitoring the chat and other functions, and of course, Matt Orbach, who is the project manager on the housing element side, which I'm going to get into in just a moment as we speak a little bit about providing a brief project overview on the general plan, the housing element, highlighting some of the schedule, just so people are aware of what's going on and what to expect as we go through this general plan update effort. I want to go on to the next slide. Oh, yes, right. One other thing I'm going to kick it back to Susan at Circle Point. She's going to explain how we're going to use Mentimeter in gathering information from you and giving opportunities to share. So let me mute myself and turn it back over to Susan real quick.
Great. So we have what we think is a fun tool to use tonight to allow you to give us a lot of input. And it's even more than just polling. We'll give you some choices on some screens. Sometimes you'll get to type in responses. So we hope that it's going to be a fun tool for us to use tonight. We're going to do a few warm-up questions just to get you used to it. And then you'll see that throughout the presentation, we'll be introducing new questions periodically. But the first thing to do is if you have a phone, if you're watching the presentation on your laptop or your desktop, if you have a phone, the best way to use the tool is to actually go to menti.com on your smartphone and enter those numbers 51114428. Or alternatively, if you're comfortable with the QR code and you can just scan your phone right up on the screen, that'll take you there as well. So it looks like we're getting some people who are landing there, which is great. So take a few minutes just for those that never give you a chance to get to that menti.com. The first question we're going to ask is completely just for practice and for fun, just to see how people are doing with the tool. So let's see, I'm not sure if we can see how many people are in there, Monica. It looks like quite a few are joining. Okay. So our practice question, just so you can get some experience using the tool, is what is your favorite color? And so on your phone screen, you should see an option to just type that favorite color in. There we go. As you can start to see in live time or real time, looks like we've got a lot of blue lovers in the virtual room tonight. Maybe a second with orange and green perhaps, but definitely a lot of blue.
You need to type in.
And if you are, I think there was a question earlier in the chat about whether if you're watching with somebody at home, if you can both participate in the polling, and you certainly can. If you each have your own smartphone, you can answer all the questions separately, which will be nice. If you are having any trouble with this Mentimeter tool at any point, you also can feel free just to type your response into the chat, and we'll make sure that we're paying attention to that as well and documenting that. These are not intended to be scientific polls in any way. It's kind of similar to what we would do in a workshop if we were asking you questions and having people respond on Post-it notes and that sort of thing as well. So it looks like we're getting a good number there. Still got lots of blue lovers in the room. So, all right, Monica, we'll go ahead to the next question. The next question is asking, in what part of the city do you live? And we have identified listed the answers by district. If you're not sure what your district is, we did put your district council person in parentheses there too, so that might be a good trigger. And if you don't live in Watsonville, We've given a couple choices there for your interest in Watsonville, whether you own a business or property or work in the city, or if you are able to, if you recreate here, shop here, those kinds of things as well. It's really small on the screen, but on your phone, the responses and the choices are definitely bigger. I can see we've got a number of people who don't live here in the city, but have another reason for loving and wanting to support efforts here in Watsonville. A number from Council District 6, a few from District 1. I know we've got around at least 40, 50 people here, so we'll give another chance here. I see some folks posting into the chat, and that's perfectly fine as well. That mentee.com will be on the top of the screen every time we do ask a question. So as new people join, we can do a little bit of intro into this again. So it looks like we still have the most from Council District 6 and quite a few that don't live directly in the city. So we'll keep going here for, I don't think we're adding any new ones here. So let's go ahead and go to the next question. And this is just a little of interest for us to find out what's working in terms of reaching folks and inviting you to participate. So for this workshop tonight, just wondering how you heard about the event tonight. So it could be social media. Maybe you received one of the email blasts from the city. It looks like there's quite a few that received that. An email from a close friend or someone else that you know. At the farmer's market, we were out at the farmer's market on last Friday, and then of course another. And Justin's email seems to have reached a number of folks here on the screen tonight, so that's great. And again, if you're just joining us, there's a website up at the top of the screen. You see mentee.com. If you have a smartphone, just grab your smartphone, type that web address in, and then put the numbers 51114428. We'll have a number of these questions throughout the evening. I would love for you to be able to see that. So this looks like somebody was saying that maybe their screen is cutting off a little bit at the bottom. I'm seeing the whole screen. If anyone else is having trouble, if you want to just maybe describe it, or maybe reach out to Celia in that email address that we shared as well, that would be great. All right, looks like your emails are working, Justin. And then we also just wondered, again, this is just a snapshot of who's here this evening. What age range best represents you or describes you? That's great. We're seeing some 25 to 34, a good representation of all categories so far, or a representation of all categories, with the exception of under 18. We are going to be trying to do some targeted youth engagement through the process, so we'll be sure to get that number up. But that's a good balance so far. We'll give a couple more minutes, and thanks for those that are posting into the chat as well, or pasting into the chat. All right, well, those will help us kind of warm us up a little bit. And again, as you'll see, we'll be asking more of these questions throughout the evening. Particularly as we get more into the content of tonight's presentation and thinking about the future of Watsonville. So I think that was our last one, Monica, and then I'll turn it back over to Justin.
Thank you, Susan. All right, so let's go over the project overview of what to expect here. Let's see. All right. In terms of the general plan, many of you may be very familiar. Some of you might be new to what a general plan entails. So let me just give a brief overview. With any community, including the city of Watsonville, counties, and so forth, they're all prepare what's called a general plan. It's comprehensive. It looks at the overall growth of a community over a long range time. It's required by state law, and typically it's accomplished every 10, 20 years, or as the need arises, and it's intended to outline the goals, policies, implementation measures to guide the community's growth in the future. And as I mentioned before, there's no set time frame for when general plans are updated, but it should be done periodically to remain current. This, of course, is different from a housing element, which must be updated every 8 years per state law. Let's go to the next slide. For those that are familiar with the previous general plan, you'll note a lot of things that are likely going to be similar in terms of its format and its content. On the screen here, you'll see what are intended to be the overall chapters included in, and these include specific elements that are required to be included in any general plan, such as land use and circulation, safety, conservation, noise. These are things that have to be in any and all general plan. You can see on this list of those are going to be a component of this one as well. We're also going to be including some new things that hadn't been a part of past general plans, and that's going to reflect some of the efforts that has been underway in recent years, such as the Climate Action Adaptation Plan, some local housing mitigation efforts that have been prepared to, as well as some work on environmental justice topics and concerns as well. So you'll see a lot of these things will be woven throughout the applicable sections of the plan, such as particularly land use and transportation when it comes to how we prepare for increased risk from climate change and address environmental justice concerns. You'll note that housing is listed on this, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. So the housing element is one of the many elements of the general plan, but is, as I mentioned before, updated on a regular 8-year time cycle. We're in what's called the 6th cycle of the housing element. And unlike the general plan, the housing element has to be updated and remain current per state law. For those that are following these very closely, you probably have heard of the quotas called RHNA, the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, Regional Housing Need Allocation Figure, and this is assigned to all jurisdictions. So for example, in the city of Watsonville, we have a RHNA figure of just over 2,000, which for those that know what was in the last housing cycle, it was roughly 3 times the amount that we will be planning for accommodating in the next 8 years. And that reflects the need for housing today, as well as in the future based on the housing crisis. You'll note that this increase in planning for this is not unique to Watsonville. This is the case for other jurisdictions within our region and across the state. There is a greater effort on trying to address the need for housing all across the state. The time frame for this current housing cycle, which we'll call the 6th cycle, is going to, once it's adopted, will be from the 2024 in the next 8 years in the future until 2032. I highlight this only to say that while the housing element has a prescribed time frame in which it applies, the general plan is looking out further into the future, typically 20 to 30 years. And so you'll note that we'll be thinking longer term as part of the general plan effort. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. This is one of many opportunities for reaching you that are participating tonight, and hopefully even more people as part of the community. Will be maintaining a website, which you can see some screen captures here. There's been a number of postings on social media. We noted earlier that many of you heard about this event through social media, that's very nice to hear. Obviously direct emails as well, flyers, pop-up events. There's a range of things that we'll be doing to reach people. These are some of the ones we're just highlighting that it's going to be done online. And towards the end of the meeting, we'll invite you to take a survey to further share your thoughts. Let's go to the next slide. Touched on a few of the things we've already done and will be doing, including pop-up events. You see the picture in the upper right, that's taken of us being at the farmers market this last Friday. And we plan on returning to the farmers market in the next 2 Fridays as well. There's some other events that are coming up too. I will highlight them at the very end of the meeting. Just to let you know that as part of this robust effort, we'll have topic group meetings with key stakeholders, a number of workshops. This is the first of several. We also have set up what we call a community advisory committee for having a representation from a wide segment of the community to provide their input as well. So this is one of many ways in which we're trying to reach you and give an opportunity to share your views for where you would like the community, or where you would like the city to go. Next slide, please. The overall project schedule is shown here. Obviously, we're at the very beginning of this effort, what we're calling the discovery phase, where we're initiating the outreach efforts, going over some of the key concepts that will be looked into as to help make sure that we're on the right track for where we want the general plan to cover. The other thing to highlight here is the text in what looks kind of like an orangey yellow on my screen is the housing element components. And so what's going on right now is on the housing element side is the site selection process. And this is something that will inform the preparation of the housing element, and it is required by HCD, the Housing and Community Development Department, a state agency, in looking at what are the appropriate sites that can accommodate new housing as infill in within the city limits. And that's going to inform a lot of things that you'll see is coming up with the draft housing elements, which we're tentatively looking to have prepared by the summertime. And then there'll be subsequent opportunities for having meetings, workshops, and study sessions, a range of events, so as to be able to share what that entails and what to expect. Looking further into the future and more on the general plan side, we're looking at preparing alternatives based on sort of land use scenarios towards the end of this year, and then really working in greater effort on some of the, not only the plan preparation, but then the environmental work into next year as well. So just want to give you a broad overview of the flow of how these efforts intermix and where they're headed over the next 2+ years. Next one. All right. So now we have one of those Mentimeter questions for you. I'm going to turn it back over to Susan to get some of your input.
Great. So you may remember a few slides back, Justin talked about all the different elements or topics that are covered in the general plan. So we've identified or listed those. And again, that's much easier to see on your phone, but you can see there on the screen how what the choices are. And we just want to know which of those topics are of most interest to you, or at least right now. You might learn some more about some of these and maybe they'll become more interesting to you through the process, but which ones kind of resonate most with you and maybe even drew you here tonight. So I see housing is one of the highest, and land use and community design more broadly. I see some on climate change there, economic development, a few transportation as well. I see both housing and land use growing as well there. Recreation and parks are starting to pick up some speed there as well. So you can select up to 3. I think that's how we have it set. So if you don't have to choose just one, but this is just for us to see what kinds of topics are of most interest, to at least the folks in the virtual room this evening. So land use and community design, still getting the most likes there, if you will. See transportation growing a little bit more, economic development as well. Parks is making a big comeback from where it started. So love to see that too. Let's see, just a couple on environmental resource management. If you just look at the words, that doesn't always tell you a whole lot. So we'll be able to get more into what some of these mean as we move through the process. See a little bit growing on transportation again as well. Clearly there's some interest in all the topics. We don't have any takers right now on historic preservation, but I can't imagine that's not important to a lot of people in the community of Watsonville. So that is something that we will be addressing as well, historic resources. Seeing a slowdown on responses. So we'll take a couple more here. Looks like land use, community design, and housing, followed by recreation and parks and transportation are some of the top interests in the group we have tonight. So we can move to the next question. And then just a quick question. We mentioned a couple times, and Susie started out talking about the prior general plan effort. We are going to use some of the graphics and some of the ideas that were developed during that process a number of years ago, because there's some really good insight in that document. There was some good engagement from the community during that process. So some of what we're going to share with you tonight were some of the features and some of the ideas expressed in that draft plan. But certainly we are not tied to any of those. We want to get your ideas and your thoughts on some of those, as well as new features, new ideas, and new thoughts about the future of Watsonville. So it looks like most folks did not, at least those that are responding to the Mentimeter. I did enter, I put into the chat again the Mentimeter code and the website. If you are just joining us, we would love to have you jump in at any point in these survey questions. So a lot of folks that didn't participate, some maybe are not sure. There's probably always great engagement activities going on in the city of Watsonville, and you know you participated in something a few years ago. Maybe it was the general plan, maybe not. So I see some people, a couple folks pasting into the chat that they did an online survey, so that's great. So we're just curious who might have participated, who might remember. We've got a handful that definitely were probably or may have been integrally involved in that Vista 2030, and so we definitely want to call back to that when we can. All right, let's jump in. So now we're going to really kind of dig into some more of the meat of our presentation and workshop tonight. So we want to start with talking about assets, and then we'll launch right into talking about some challenges. So we want to start with some assets, and these are drawn upon some things that we've noticed just from doing some existing conditions analysis, looking at all your previous planning documents, looking at some of the studies that have been done, as well as the Vista 2030 plan that I mentioned. So we want to just highlight some of which we the city and the team is identifying as preliminary assets and things that are really important and unique about this, the city of Watsonville. And one is your unique small town character. You can see some of the imagery there that I think represents some of that uniqueness and small town character. The second is your beautiful, what we would consider a world-class agricultural setting. So you have a beautiful setting for the city of Watsonville, and that's something that we hear time and time again, that's really important to this community. The access that you have to natural resources, including the sloughs, the rivers, the mountains, the beaches, the envy of probably many cities throughout the country to have access to all those beautiful natural resources. So we're identifying that as really one of the huge assets that you have here in the city. You have a number of different types of parks, which are really great as well. So catering to different types of activities. Some are a little bit more passive, some are very active, some are very youth oriented. So lots of what appears to us is really great, great parks throughout your city. And then the proximity, and this is going to be kind of a several layers rich of an asset. So you've got close proximity. So you see the pink circles on that map, and that means that what that represents is a 1/4 mile distance from a park. So you can see a lot of the city is covered and has a 1/4 mile access to a park. The next being, you can go ahead to the next slide, Monica. Next is the same for schools, the proximity to schools. So those same pink circles representing a 1/4 mile distance or proximity to a school. Daycare centers, similar. You can see again, 1/4 mile access to daycares throughout the community. I think community centers are next, really great proximity there. And I think the final one shows trails as well, and maybe not quite as much coverage there, but still pretty good accessibility to trails. And then also transit, which is transit stops throughout the city. So we identified that as a really significant asset as well, and the proximity, so the closeness to all of those different resources and amenities throughout the city. And then finally, walkability of your downtown and most of your neighborhoods. You can see great sidewalks and great assets and kind of that feeling of walkability throughout the city. So those are just some of the initial assets that we've been talking about. We've heard people talking about. So from those, we are interested to hear what of those have most meaning for you. And we're asking you just kind of select your top 2. We're going to also give you a chance to add and to let us know what we missed and what other assets are really important that maybe weren't identified. Of course, all of those probably have room for improvement, which is what we're going to talk about next when we talk about challenges. But you can have something that's an asset and a challenge at the same time. So let's see, walkability, the walkable downtown neighborhoods, getting a lot of attention. Proximity to all of those different resources I mentioned, the community centers, the daycare, the trails, transit, the natural resource access, seeing that one get a lot of attention there as well. Clearly, everything that we shared is important to folks in the room, the virtual room tonight. See small town character, agricultural setting, kind of a bouncing back between the walkability and the natural resources there, but great. So lots of great assets that you have in Watsonville to start this long range planning effort that we'll be going through. I'll give another few seconds here. So I see the numbers slowing down a little bit, seeing natural resource access, ending up right about the top there with proximity to all those features and walkability a close second. So we'll go to the next one. And this one is back to kind of the same style that we did on that what is your favorite color question. So here we would love for you to type in what are some assets that we missed? What are some really great things about Watsonville that are important to you that we haven't mentioned yet or that you would like to reinforce? So you can just type that directly into this question and we'll start to see things pop up on the screen. And while we're seeing that, I also see some things coming into the chat as well. The airport being an asset, the city plaza and its proximity to the library. So I see a couple on the airport, which is great. Diversity, here, see that coming up very loud and clear. That's a really important asset that we did not identify and is important to the city of Watsonville and the uniqueness that it offers. I see future rail stops, the Mexican food mecca, again, more on the airport, modern housing, cultural diversity, local produce, the people, really important, the community itself, excellent. Cultural heritage, some of these are definitely related. People, I see people again, I see the people and people. I bet if we combine those together, that would be even bigger on the screen. Shopping, somebody wrote drive-throughs, circulates, maybe circulation, the kind of the overall patterns, good weather, Fortune 500 companies, festivals. So is that kind of really contributing to that sense of community college. I see potential and some future opportunities is coming up as big assets as well. And we are going to talk a little bit more about the future before we leave tonight as well. Access to the bay, better access to the beach. I see some needs popping up too, and which is a good transition into our next topic, which is sort of thinking about challenges. Farmers market, rail trail, free events, lots of really great important assets there. I see the one on arts. I didn't mention the arts. That one's popping up pretty large as well. So if I didn't mention it before, the larger the word, the more times it's being repeated. So if we see diversity, the people, arts, airport, modern housing, and cultural heritage really popping off the page. And that's because more people are saying the same phrases, the same words. So that's where we're seeing those pop up even bigger than others. Terrific. All right, so let's change gears a little bit and think about, despite all of the amazing things and amazing assets that Watsonville has, we know there are also challenges and obstacles that need to be addressed and overcome. And so we're going to do kind of the same thing. We're going to share several challenges that we've observed or we've heard from the community already so far through some existing conditions analysis, that sort of thing. So we'll share some of those and then we'll dig into some additional challenges that you might identify as well. So first, need for more housing. So we saw one of the assets is the modern housing. So people love some of the housing that's going in. I did see a couple notes on the last slide there on need for housing. So we recognize that there's a need for different types of housing. And we will ask a question later on about types of housing that you feel is needed in the city as well. The second challenge is noting that Watsonville is largely built out, meaning there's not a lot of place to do new development, add new housing, add new development. So the colored parcels that you see on this map are those that are either vacant or have some development potential, easy development potential right now. So it's that's a little bit of a challenge for trying to grow or to change. On the alternative, as you see in the next slide, there's a lot of opportunity for infill. So we'll get into that in a little bit later, but just noting it's largely built out, but there are still places that can accommodate some infill growth. Third challenge is really, we've heard about the vehicular, some of the vehicular traffic, I should say, that can make it somewhat uncomfortable or feeling unsafe for pedestrians. So some of the wider roadways, the major corridors in town sometimes are providing a little bit of domination by the vehicles. And we've also heard about some gaps and barriers for the pedestrian and bicycle network. So while definitely one of the assets is that those walkable neighborhoods, walkable downtown. There are places throughout the city that are not walkable and not bikeable, and have those gaps. And so we've identified that as a challenge as well. We've also heard and noted that some of the transit service, while you have great proximity to transit stops, it's not always as frequent or as quick as people would like it to be. And some of the locations where to wait for that transit are less than appealing and less than comfortable for people as well. Of course, natural hazards, and that is both flooding, wildfires. You know very well in this community the impacts of flooding, unfortunately. So we know that that's a huge challenge and a hurdle that the city is dealing with and trying to address. But lots of different natural hazards that can come into play are challenging. We've also heard and observed the airport safety can also be a challenge, as observed by some in the community as well. And the job base, noting that the job base is stable, but there's desire to have diversification and expansion in that job base. So different types of jobs and economic development that could come into play. So those are 8 challenges that initial challenges we've identified. For this one, we're asking you to identify or to rate those as well. So which of those challenges that we just presented do you feel are most important or most pressing to address? So we'd love to hear some or see some thoughts from folks on the screen here. So I'm seeing just initially a couple votes for the gaps in the pedestrian network. See a little bit on job diversification, the need for housing. See those numbers changing as we go. Gaps in pedestrian and bicycle networks still staying pretty strong, along with housing and that job diversification. There's a number of others coming into, and we'll have that question in just a moment, allowing you to help explain what some of those others are. The limitations on being pretty built out is identified there as well. But if you on the transit service, the high vehicle traffic, seeing those pedestrian and bicycle gaps and the need for more housing and job diversification staying up there at the top. And again, if you've just joined us, if you go to the menti.com and put in those codes, you will see the choices and can join the survey online. Looking on to the chat real quick, diverse housing is identified another challenge. Reinforcing on the gaps for pedestrians. There's some folks talking about transit. And I see some people talking about some opportunities, and we're going to definitely be getting into that this evening as well, a little bit more. And someone noting the availability of transit being a little deceiving, and that's true. That's so the proximity to transit is there, but maybe the transit service needs some improvements. So looking still at the gaps, need for more housing and job diversification. So let's move to the open-ended question next, and have you identify some challenges that we did not yet mention. So you can type those in. You don't have to just limit yourself to one. You can enter a couple different challenges as well. And I'll look to the chat for those that are not using the Mentimeter tool. So first person in, I see with the word crime. So other challenges, so traffic accidents, okay, seeing some pop up. Too many activists. So I think some might probably disagree with that, but I can understand how that could be a challenge as well. Pollution, education. So I'm guessing that means there's challenges in having the kind of education. Would somebody wants to elaborate on that? Would love to hear a little more on that as well. Gentrification, certainly. Serving the unhoused, lack of youth services, water, you see NIMBYs, too much parking. We're going to talk a little bit about that as an opportunity as well. Money leaving Watsonville, diverse restaurants, so maybe asking for more diversity in restaurants, special ed, okay. People street racing, things for teens to do, so more on the youth side. It's a senior community, or maybe that's a need for more senior community. Outdated. Lack of safe family events. Airport limits housing, pedestrian safety. Food prices, lack of resources. I see some things on litter. Housing again for all levels. Focusing on agriculture. Homeless infrastructure gaps, so that idea of not just maybe the gaps in bicycle and sidewalk networks, but potentially other infrastructure as well. Seeing crime, education, and traffic accidents, and homelessness as some of the bigger words there. That means they're getting more than 1 or 2 or 3 people putting those in. Pesticide exposure, jobs with living wages, agricultural spring, so some of the impacts of agriculture, new job opportunities, over policing, sports fields, safety for bikes, lots of challenges here. But some of these, we like to say challenges can also be an opportunity. So when we start to identify those challenges, what can we do? How can we improve on those? I see still traffic accidents, homelessness, crime, education, gentrification is getting a little bit bigger there too. Senior services. It's always easier to identify challenges. They somehow they kind of roll off the tongue, but we definitely know that we can turn these challenges into opportunities. Speeding cars, slowing underserved communities, be more business friendly. I'm trying to read off as many as I can because I know it's a little small for some folks probably. I see the over policing's growing a little bit there. Driving using the phone, youth crime, road hazards, infrastructure maintenance. So lots of challenges. And although this is just a graphic on the screen, this is a way for us to document these. So we will be documenting all of these challenges into the report for this evening's workshop as well. And I see a few more things in the chat. Lack of farm worker housing. It's okay. You can go to the next one, Monica. And some business needs as well. So, okay. So now we've talked through some challenges. We talked through some of the assets, and all those set the tone for what needs to happen or what can happen in the future. So we think about assets. We need to preserve those and protect those and build upon those, enhance the assets that you have. And in terms of challenges, we need to find ways to address those challenges through this general plan. And so some of those challenges that were identified are general plan level or general plan material. Some may be addressed through other means, but we'll certainly document them all and figure out how do we share that with the appropriate city team to help address those. But lots of those tie into this idea of how are we going to think about the future. And so for this piece of the workshop tonight, we're going to change it up a little bit. So rather than present to you a list of here's all the ideas, what do you think of them? We're going to give you a little sense of some of those first and ask questions maybe in a little bit of a different way. So we'll go ahead and jump in. So thinking about the Vista 2030 just as a background. So this, and I'm going to ask Justin and the project team throughout this next series to please jump in at any point if you want to elaborate on things or point things out. We're going to take this one a little bit slower because we want to make sure that we're really spending some time thinking about the future. So this is the land use vision diagram that was developed in the last general plan effort. And so you can see on the screen some of the different features that were identified. Justin, if you want to give a little background here.
Certainly. Some of the main takeaways of this is a high level conceptual map. And that's why they have these, these colorful blobs shown across the map, just to highlight what areas where we might expect change or conservation in different forms. So for example, you see the sort of purples and pink colors, which are focused primarily around downtown and key corridors. Those are areas where we're at the previous general plan effort, we're thinking of the change that was going to occur in the future would involve more infill, more multi-story or mixed use type buildings in areas that could accommodate them well. Also shown on the map are, of course, our park and open space areas that are intended to be connected and maintained in perpetuity and not developed on. So it's just showing the range of areas that within the community where we are envisioning things to occur over time. And you see some areas that has no color at all. And that's just simply to communicate that there wasn't envisioned to be a lot of new development in those areas. And those are primarily along single family or other residential areas of the community. One thing to highlight as well is that in yellow towards the periphery, it does show some of the growth areas. I'm speaking in terms of Buena Vista, Atkinson Lane, and outlined is the Manabiao, or formerly Manabi-Bergstrom specific plan area. And some of those, as we'll talk about in some of the future slides, some of those areas were incorporated into the city limits and others were not. And we'll go a little bit more into that. But the main takeaway here is looking big picture, where are different types of land uses and what areas of the community we thought that might envision change, and want to highlight this graphic up front as a discussion piece with the group to just check in to see if this is still where the community thinks about the future and whether there's we want to make some adjustments to this as well. And let me just see if David wants to chime in and offer anything else here too.
Sure, Justin, I'd be happy to. We've been working with the community for the last couple of years on the downtown plan also, and we've seen there a lot of interest in intensifying the activities in the downtown, adding housing, adding vitality to the businesses, and the corridors, which you see on this diagram that was made years ago by some very skillful friends of ours, not friend, but people who do the same kind of work that we do, who we have a lot of respect for, had envisioned that more active environments, more walkable active environments where there could be some mixtures of housing, some new shops and restaurants, businesses might expand along the corridors to bring more of those lively activities and amenities and new housing opportunities to within easy walking distance of a lot of the existing neighborhoods. So really that's what that diagram with those magenta blobs going up Lake and Freedom from the downtown are showing. And
we're going to jump into some specifics on those corridors in just a few minutes as well.
Yeah, I was just explaining because a lot of people don't plans mean a lot to us planners, but sometimes plans just can look like purple blobs. Yep. So I was just describing that's what this diagram was intending to convey, that those corridors could be made into more interesting places that could provide more interesting places for residents of neighborhoods to go to without expanding the city outward into the agricultural landscapes, except in those yellow areas, which have already the ones to the north along Corralitos, south of Corralitos Creek, have already been spoken for, and then the one over by Buena Vista is probably not going to happen because of concerns about safety related to the airport.
So keep this graphic in mind as we're moving through the ideas of opportunities, because we're going to kind of show you some other graphics that build on this idea of these are some opportunity areas for change and transformation. Yeah. And certainly, like Justin said, if you think this is we're all wet and we should go down a different path, then please let us know that as well. Paste into the chat some areas that maybe we're not showing that should also be considered.
This was prepared before. We think it's a good start, but we want, with your help, we want to refine it a lot.
And it's a good point, David, just to reinforce that this is just a start tonight. We're at the very
Yes.
beginning stages of really envisioning the future. So anything that we're sharing tonight, they're just food for thought. They're just initial ideas. So don't feel like anything that we're sharing or ideas that we're sharing with you are something that is actually going to happen or has even been determined yet. So
And
these are just thoughts for exploration.
Nobody's trying to sell you anything. We're just asking questions.
So the next graphic, then the next slide shows, which we saw this one a little bit earlier, but all this area in red was identified as, and some of these coincide with those corridor purple blobs that you saw on the last map, but these are areas for possible change or infill, as we often will call it, which means there's not total change, it's not brand new development, but there's opportunities to fill in gaps. If you think about like a set of teeth, some missing teeth, we can fill in some new development or new uses, new housing, new commercial, other kinds of features that people want in those little gap areas. So this area with red has some holes that might be opportunities for that kind of infill.
And one of the comments that popped up earlier was too much parking. And so there are retail is changing a lot over the last 10, 20, 30 years. And so a lot of shopping centers have more parking than they may need. And that gives an opportunity for more fun activities to be filled in there, to provide, to give you more fun per acre instead of parking.
Very good. And one thing I just want to highlight, I'm sorry, Susan.
No, go.
It's just that, this is a graphic just highlighting the areas where we think a lot more intensity, more infill could be accommodated. And for those that have been part of the downtown Watsonville specific plan effort, they'll note that the large area around downtown is central to this area. And as part of that effort, we're anticipating potential growth or accommodating more housing to the tune of over 3,000 new units over, again, a 20 to 30 year time frame. So that effort aligns very closely with previous long-term planning efforts, and just want to provide a little bit of context for those that perhaps are new to this or were part of that effort as well. Susan, go ahead.
Great. So the last two graphics that we showed are, again, just for context. So kind of think about those as kind of a foundation for some of the other things that we're going to share in the next several slides. So, but before we jump into infill and change, we want to start with the neighborhoods. So we know that there's, as Justin noted, there was a lot of that white space, which happens to be a lot of existing established neighborhoods. And one of the very important things is to identify and note and protect those neighborhoods. So what are the ways in which we can preserve and enhance all of the existing neighborhoods? So this again shows that graphic with those colored blobs, which are opportunity areas for change and development, but so too are all those white areas, which are the existing neighborhoods. And some are not white, there's the downtown neighborhoods as well, they're in purple, but there are a lot of amazing, wonderful neighborhoods in Watsonville that need to be preserved. And so we want to just kind of start this conversation about the future with thinking about those neighborhoods. And we have on the next slide what you think might be or should be some priorities for the existing Watsonville neighborhoods, whichever neighborhoods, they may be different for different neighborhoods, of course, and throughout the process, we can certainly dig into the differences between each of the neighborhoods, what's needed and maybe what's not, but just wanted to hear from you and see what kinds of thoughts you think should be priorities for the existing neighborhoods in the city. So I'm seeing some responses already. I see some activity into the chat already, jumping ahead to what to do with the airport. I'm not sure that we're going to decide tonight about closing or not closing. I've seen both sides there, so that's definitely not going to be something that we decide through this process, but we certainly can have those conversations. So seeing improving sidewalks and streets, having more nearby shops, recreations and amenities, infill housing, more trees and beautification, improved access to transit, which we identified as a challenge earlier, renovations to existing housing, seeing a bit more on the infill housing, so opportunities to create new infill housing in existing neighborhoods, providing again those shops and services, recreation and amenities for the existing neighborhoods. And again, if you're just jumping on, there is a website at the top of the screen that says menti.com. If you go to menti.com and then put in that numerical code, it'll give you the option to put these answers in. If you are having trouble, again, feel free to just paste some ideas into the chat on what you think should be priorities for existing Watsonville neighborhoods, whether it's one of these choices or something else that you'd like to add. I see some folks talking about rezoning in the chat as well. So still seeing quite a bit on improving streets and sidewalks, infill housing, more nearby amenities, improved access to transit, more beautification. So lots of opportunities to enhance your already walkable, important neighborhoods throughout the city, including adding more housing to those neighborhoods, which seems to be a common theme here and what should be a priority. Seeing some more things in the chat about local parks, maybe more improved maintenance for some of the local parks, accessibility, more skate parks, more activities for the youth, and that could be in some of the neighborhoods. And that also could be in some of the corridors that we're going to talk about next. So let's go ahead and jump into the next section. Before I get into the corridors, we did, David noted about the downtown specific plan. And I'm sure many of you or some of you have been involved, were involved in that effort. And many general plans will spend a lot of time talking about and planning a downtown or the downtown as part of the effort. You as a city have gone through an effort prior to the general plan where you got to spend time just talking about the downtown. And so what we're planning to do for this general plan effort is to build on all of those great dialogue and great planning that happened with the downtown. So you can go to the next slide here. I just wanted to give a little insight for those that maybe weren't that familiar with the downtown specific plan. But obviously one of the big goals in the city is to preserve, revitalize, and infill your downtown, as Justin mentioned a few minutes ago. So with that as a large goal, an undertaking or a downtown specific plan was undertaken to try to accomplish that. And I will let maybe Dave talk a little bit about the downtown specific plan, just to give some context. We're not going to ask a bunch of questions about the downtown because that got a process all by itself, but wanted to give you a little sense of what is included in that downtown specific plan. Maybe go to the next slide.
I'm sorry?
No, I was telling Monica, go ahead to the next slide that shows the downtown.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Well, so the downtown specific plan, there was a lot of analysis of the existing downtown, which has a beautiful existing structure, the block structure, the way it's organized, the beautiful Watsonville Plaza, the historic buildings. It's just an incredibly strong framework for a downtown. Many cities don't have such a beautiful thing. So the work and the visioning work and the technical work focused on creating high quality standards for new buildings that ensure that some buildings that are taller and provide more opportunities for more people to live downtown will still be compatible in their scale and their character and their look and feel with the historic buildings of downtown, and that the streets will become more walkable rather than less walkable. Did some very productive work with Caltrans to get them, because you have a Caltrans highway coming through your downtown, and they were willing to let the city plan for making it much more walkable. Caltrans' main job is getting the cars to go through, but we came up with designs that are going to provide much better on-street parking, better sidewalks, better bike lanes, to make it much easier to get to and through and around in downtown. And then there's the updated zoning allows a range of a flexible range of commercial uses within the ground floor spaces that will be easy to permit, won't require a cumbersome process to get permission to build uses there. The parking is going to be increasingly managed as a shared parking arrangement by the city, so that to make it a place that businesses can move into easily and do business in, and that people can get to easily, park their car once, walk around and enjoy things, and that more and more people will be able to live there as new housing is built, and it just should become like it's always been, only more so and more so over time.
Thank you,
Thanks,
David.
David. Maybe Justin, if you want to add a little bit more about the context for the downtown specific plan and general plan.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great overview. I just want to highlight a couple key concepts here is that whenever you're thinking about the future and wanting to accommodate change and more growth in particular, and focusing in our downtown effort, you'll see that we've tried to create both some predictability and flexibility at the same time, which I know is a real tension when it comes to what we might want to expect. But I can share that we've had a number of particular developers who are interested in adding more mixed-use type buildings along Main Street, along Rodriguez and other corridors, and are waiting for the document going in place. And so some of the things that we've been planning for may actually come to fruition, which is very exciting. As you never want a document just to be prepared and then collect dust on a shelf. So we're very optimistic on how this is going to help shape the future for Watsonville. And of course, it's going to be incorporated into the general plan effort as we focus not only on downtown, but the wider community and how that fits together. So why don't we go ahead and move on, because we have a couple other slides that speak to some of these other areas in which we're looking to plan as well, and how those might allow for more maybe multi-story buildings, more mixed use of types of developments, really focusing in on the public realm and what that looks and feels like, and how that's a better environment for everybody who lives and works there.
And for those
Great.
of you that were involved with the downtown plan, a lot of the basic elements that are going to make your downtown an increasingly wonderful place are also suitable for the corridors and other neighborhood centers around the town. Not at the same scale, not as big, not as much of it, but the same sort of environment with wide sidewalks, with shade trees, comfortable, interesting businesses to go visit that you could walk to or ride a bike to from your house, and housing upstairs rather than just a lot of parking lots.
So as Justin said, let's launch into talking about some of these opportunity corridors, and we go back to that same magenta purple blobs that were on that original graphic, and looking at Freedom Boulevard and Lake Avenue. And we're going to kind of talk about these in tandem. So these are areas we saw one of the challenges that was expressed was a lot of parking, and you can see that in that bottom graphic there. So a lot of pavement along these corridors and some missing teeth, if you will, along these corridors as well, that give some opportunities for new mixed use, new infill housing, and other kinds of improvements that they've also identified through some of the challenges.
Oh, and if I interject one thing, also, when the streets are that wide, people drive fast. We saw quite a few comments about the traffic moving fast. It moves fast because that's how people drive on streets that look like that.
So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So this just shows an aerial view, and where it reinforces that same thing I just said, with lots of pavement, lots of blacktop there. And all of that represents opportunities to do what we're calling, again, infill. So when we think about a corridor, it's not just the roadway. The corridor is the road and all of those that land adjacent to that roadway. That presents itself as the Freedom Boulevard and the Lake Avenue corridors when we talk about corridors. So this is another view of that Kmart center with the parking area, the street. And so we're just going to show a couple of images of what could be. It's not a direct before and after along this area, but from a similar kind of environment, just to show you kind of thinking outside the box a little bit. So go ahead to the next one, Monica. So this is a street in Fresno, or a corridor in Fresno. Again, not exactly like anything we just shared, but just you can see a lot of blacktop here as well. And this is an envisioned what corridors like those can transform into. So it's not just about the new uses, although that's really important component, new land uses, a new development that could happen. It's also a change in the mobility, the circulation patterns, the street environment, the sidewalk environment, street trees and beautification, those sorts of things. All that can happen in some of these corridors. So just kind of giving some inspirational vision to some of the things that can happen. Go to the next one. So in thinking about Lake Avenue and Freedom Boulevard corridors specifically, what are some of the ways you would like to see them change in the future? And for this one, we're giving you a chance. You can just check all that apply. If you want to paste into the chat, I already see somebody saying way too much concrete, convert it to parks and gardens and multi-use buildings. So go ahead and either use the menti.com opportunity here, or feel free to paste into the chat as well. But what are your visions for specifically the Lake Avenue and the Freedom Boulevard corridors? And we're going to talk about a couple other corridors in just a few minutes as well. So give you a chance to respond there. I see someone saying in the chat as well that Freedom Boulevard, maybe thinking about reuse of the car lots, the sales car lots potentially in the future. So see here, better sidewalks and bike amenities, more shops, restaurants, and services, more housing, improved streetscape, parks and plazas, improved transit service. We've seen that in a few different choices here. More community amenities, so things like libraries, community centers, art centers, things that are more public community amenities. Definitely seeing a lot of support for better sidewalks and bike facilities. Streetscape, shops and restaurants. So see into the chat, more mixed use, restaurants, undergrounding the utilities, and more trees. Someone also noting in the chat about the cemeteries and how those can really be an asset as well. That's open space, that's green space, right? It can be contributing to the environment. I see a few others. We are going to ask in a few slides down, we're going to ask for those other ideas as well, but keep pasting them into the chat as well. See live work. Yeah. All right, so lots of support here for lots of transformation, lots of improvements that could happen specifically to the Lake Avenue and Freedom Boulevard. So let's change gears and look at a couple other corridors. So these are a couple of other opportunity corridors in Watsonville as well. So this is Main Street and Green Valley, and opportunities here to introduce some infill that more corresponds to the character of these two corridors. So they have a little bit more of a natural edge, closeness or proximity to the natural edges, and a little bit of a different kind of environment here. I don't know, Dave, if you want to give any additional context to the Main Street and Green Valley corridors.
Well, Main Street's fascinating because it runs so close to so many of the sloughs, and there's a lot of big shopping centers along there, and a lot of visual access to the sloughs. So we, at a minimum, we think that there may be opportunities for better trail access toward the sloughs. There may be some opportunities at some point in if some of those parking lots don't need to be as big as there could be opportunities for housing that might face out toward the views of the sloughs, or maybe infill of some more interesting kinds of retail environments along there. Although we have very talented economists on the team to help keep us in balance. I mean, one can visualize lots of shops and restaurants in more places than shops and restaurants can actually stay in business. So we're going to be providing information as we go ahead as to sort of how much of those fun uses may be supportable, or what. But certainly, I see a lot of support for there being more of those activities nearer the neighborhoods, which is that's the opportunity that corridors just provide for sure.
Here you can see another version of those same two corridors. You can kind of get a better context.
Yeah, Maine is a much bigger thing with bigger parking lots on it than Freedom. So that's Main Street. Any significant change to Main Street is probably a longer term deal. Maybe in a much longer plan, maybe in a longer horizon, there might be some change there. Freedom looks to, and to some extent, Freedom in particular, and also Lake, seem to have some much nearer term opportunities for infill and change.
Go ahead, Justin.
Yeah, I was just going to build off of those 2 points. I think those are two key things to consider as we think about the future in the general plan effort is that, again, we're looking at 20, 30 years in the future. And so the question of what's going to change first or over time is important. So we may not see some change along the Main Street corridor right away, but that doesn't mean we can't plan for it in the future and think about what that might look like. I saw in the chat a range of topics, including some of the more recent infill developments. I'm thinking of where Chipotle is located at 975 Main Street. And during the Planning Commission meeting, there was questions about, well, why not housing going into this site? You know, we'd rather see that than just auto-oriented commercial type product. Granted, you know, the developer wanted to move forward with a commercial type development and not with housing. And of course, that area was zoned for thoroughfare type commercial. But that means as we think about as a community, what we might want to accommodate in the future, what we might change, how we might redesignate some of this land for more mixed use that could unlock different kinds of development in the future that perhaps are not allowed today. And so I just want to put that out there for people's consideration of, as we vision what that could look like, what this area might transition into, while at the same time perhaps giving more attention to Freedom and Lake, where we think there's more opportunities in perhaps in near term. And by near term, we're thinking 5 to 10 years time horizons. Susan, go ahead.
Great, thanks. So it gives a little more context, and we're showing the images here just so you can see the potential, but you definitely do see a little bit more green here as well. And so just another one of those inspirational kind of set of photos on the next slide. Just shows sort of like how you can have some development that has that natural green edge, but that also then supports the types of uses that you've identified, and some of those that you've identified that you'd like to see in the city of Watsonville. I'm seeing lots of activity in the chat also about local business over chain, supporting local businesses. We also see quite a bit on housing, which we're going to ask that question in just a minute too. I see lots of a flurry of activity on some ownership opportunities, so we are going to ask some of that as well. But this just gives some thoughts here, and then we'll go to the next slide, which we're going to ask you some of the same opportunities that we shared for Lake and Freedom, but maybe you have a different perspective for the Main Street and Green Valley corridors. That might be opportunities, or maybe some of these jump out more as more appropriate for this corridor or less appropriate for these corridors. So we're giving you the opportunity here to check all that apply in terms of what your thoughts are for the Main Street and the Green Valley corridors. I see some more support for lived work, some more on transit. Again, local business support. I'd love to see all that support for small businesses. So seeing a little bit of everything here in terms of some of the things people would like to see. We added one different one here that wasn't on the other set of choices, which is the recreational amenities, trailheads, things of that sort. So those may be more of access here. Better access to some of the natural features, while still, as somebody noted in the chat, environmental sustainability has got to be key. So the sensitivity to the environment. Definitely seeing more support for some housing, improved streetscape, better sidewalks, some on that recreational side, parks and plazas, open space. And we'll have a chance through this general plan process to start digging into some of these details and thinking more specifically about where things go, and how do we facilitate this kind of change to happen in these corridors. So we'll give another 5 or 10 seconds here. Outdoor, I see somebody posted something about outdoor art. So we didn't actually note that. That can be included in a streetscape, but outdoor art could be really important to that idea of creating a strong sense of identity and character, reinforcing your existing character. Somebody's mentioning public restrooms, more diverse businesses. Great. All right, let's go to the next one, Monica. And here's that question on housing. So I've been seeing a lot of activity on more specifics, and we did mention there's an online survey, which there's a few questions in that online survey as well, specific to housing, but this is a little bit different type of question. So hopefully it doesn't throw you in terms of the way the choices come up. But looking at what kinds of housing would you like to see? So this gives you a little bit of a chance to try to rank some of these different housing options. So we've got single family detached, we have a duplex or townhouse, apartments, which are more rental, condominiums, which imply more ownership, which was what I was seeing some of the conversation going on. Live work, which was expressed in the chat as well. Senior housing. Some of these are double, so you can have senior housing, that's apartments. You can have affordable housing, that's any number of these different types as well. So this is kind of a mix of different types of responses.
And the duplex and townhouse can certainly be ownership.
Correct.
They don't
Yep,
have
so-
to use it, they could, but they can be.
Same for the live work.
Certainly, yes.
So mixed use is seeing a lot of support for mixed use right now. Apartments above retail or office. Often, sometimes mixed use can even offer some ownership. It's a little less, maybe not as frequent or not as
It's tricky, but
Comments?
you could have condos.
So let folks keep responding to this one a little bit. See another response to some of the, for the corridors having more entertainment. So really trying to find spots for entertainment like bowling, arcade, some of the bigger types of entertainment venues. So see mixed use, affordable housing, live work, condos made their way up the scale there. And clearly all of these are important. They're all receiving attention, all receiving people ranking those. I see somebody added a mixed use high rise with entertainment venues to try to bring some of those comments together. So that's great. Definitely more opportunities to keep talking about housing here in Watsonville. I see people still responding, so I don't want to cut anyone off. We'll give
But there's a lot of creative ideas. This is wonder. You guys are great.
Complete the sidewalks along Freedom. Yep, that's too many, closing those gaps. Yep. All right, Monica, let's go ahead and go to the next question. So here, I know we've been seeing a lot of these ideas popping into the chat, which is great. Here's another opportunity to type some things in. We'll see what pops up and in what other types of uses, or what would you like to see, whether it's a use or some kind of improvement along these corridors, along or near these corridors. So maybe not specifically right along the 4 corridors we've identified, but maybe somewhere near. What are some other types of improvements or uses or new features that you'd like to see that we haven't necessarily talked about? And it can be as specific or as general as you would like it to be.
Because when we talk about corridor plans a lot, we do a lot of corridor plans, and what we mean by that, we don't just mean the street and the buildings necessarily that face it directly. We mean a block or two on each side.
Great. Well,
and of course the street.
People are starting to like using the chat, maybe more than this open-ended term here, but got fancy trampoline places, one of those big air type of places. I see tiny homes, ADUs, so the accessory dwelling units, which are the dwellings, the small housing units that can often be put in backyards. I see mixed use, very small housing apartments. So I'm really thinking about not everything needs to be big. So I think there are a few comments on that. And now we're seeing some action here. So food halls, breweries, bowling alleys, nightlife,
Yeah.
creek retaining walls.
Yeah.
See the trampoline place come up. More nightlife, again, art. So safe streets. So thinking about the safety of these streets, outdoor seating, breweries, parks, and outdoor or bowling alley.
Well,
See something
the safe streets is kind of the starting point. You know, once you have a safe street, then a lot of things start to happen along it.
True. I see bathrooms coming up again. I saw that earlier in the chat as well. Bike paths, safer crosswalks, which ties into the safer streets. Parks with water features, food trucks, community gardens, better lighting.
Perfect.
Wetland art. Love that. I tying kind of the art and the sustainability together. outdoor exercise equipment, trail access, bus rapid transit, more recreation and nightlife, parklets, which sometimes is a way to take over a parking space, an on-street parking space, and turn that into a small public space. More support for
Yeah.
tiny homes, pop-up businesses, movie theater. Safe Streets, still one of the bigger ones there. It's hard to imagine anyone wanting to enjoy all of these other activities without having the safety feature there of these streets, right?
And this is great.
Outdoor seating is getting more, nightlife, childcare centers. So we saw good proximity to childcare centers, but it doesn't mean that there's necessarily enough of them, right? Mixed use, local coffee shops, more in the tiny homes. This is terrific. And we will have one question at the very end before we go that lets you, so if you think of something new that you didn't get to put in, we are going to have one more opportunity to express some opinions as well. I see some things in the chat about the kind of the overhead monument signs, archways, historic plaques, so historic resources, commuter rail, ecotourism, showcasing the Watsonville heritage, some really interesting, fun stuff into the chat as well. So this is terrific. So we've got another set of areas or ideas we want to throw out there to you as well to get some feedback and some thoughts. So we'll go to the next one, Monica. So these are some other areas or other opportunities, not a couple of them are geographies, but they also just represent kind of opportunities for more economic development and different types of improvements and features that are maybe a little bit different than necessarily what we would envision for these corridors that we talked about. So the first one is the industrial area, the light industrial area. So really amazing place that you have right now, the light industrial area that is in Watsonville. Opportunities potentially to change that a little bit or to enhance that or to grow some of the types of businesses or development or economic development opportunities that are there. Justin or Dave, if you want to stop me and add something here, I can keep going.
Yeah, the one thing I just want to highlight is, some of these concepts were explored as a downtown specific plan because the boundary of it runs up right up to Walker Street. And there's a nice transition between downtown towards our industrial zone. So we thought very carefully about what that might look like and where we might want to accommodate more housing or preserve more industrial development. You'll note that Walker Street is maintained with an industrial designation. There's a lot of jobs along that corridor, and that's really important to the community. Down the road, there's a possibility for further growth potential, particularly if as RTC works on reactivating passenger rail, where train service might go, and how that connects over to Pajaro and to the water region. And I'm thinking in terms all the way down to Salinas and to the Bay Area. So there's opportunities to think about how this area might transition over time as well, and what's important today, but also down the road. So I just want to raise those topics with the wider group.
And there's a lot of cities that have, well, most cities have an original train station area where a lot of business developed, often in manufacturing businesses developed around the train station as well as the downtown. So there's a lot of cities that have sort of an interesting downtown core, but then to one edge, it goes into sort of a railroad district, which can be an interesting mix. Denver has a really fine example, where you can get a very interesting intermixture of manufacturing businesses, maker spaces, artist lofts, some housing, coffee shops, brew pubs, and office uses, live work, not to displace the successful manufacturing businesses, certainly not to displace the agricultural businesses, but
right.
to perhaps fill in and diversify in certain areas. Particularly,
right. I don't think anyone's talking about wiping out the industrial and replacing it with something. It's more
good grief, no.
Kind of rethinking some of the industrial, and there's already arts there's already an art representation there. So some of these industrial areas are introducing industrial arts. So some of that type of facility as well.
And if passenger rail is coming into that area, then that changes if that's where a bunch of people will land in town, that changes a lot of the opportunities, and it can also be a way to sort of pull them in, to grab them and pull them into downtown.
Right. So then the next area kind of thinking about are what are some opportunities within the airport area? So it's not a space for mass housing and development because of the airport safety, but there could be some non-residential improvements or different types of economic development that can occur in and around the airport area that could be considered as well. And then just the overall diversification and expansion of the job-based and economy. We did see that earlier. There was some support that is a challenge, that some community members do see that as a bit of a challenge to work on. I see some debate raising in the chat on tech versus no tech, but technology can be many different kinds of things. So we could probably have an entire workshop just on technology, right? So thinking about what does that mean? Different agricultural tech to kind of keep with the ag kind of theme, but there's lots of different types of tech that when we throw the word out tech, it can mean a lot of different things.
And with the hospital, there's certainly opportunity for medical related business, and there's medical tech.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, lots of, and I just said the word tech just because I saw that popping up in the chat, but other ways to diversify the job-based and economy are things we want to hear from and to have discussions on as well. And so that's our next question, is just thinking about different ways in which we can think about new jobs and new type of economic development in the city of Watsonville, and which of these words or these phrases come up as important. And again, feel free to paste into the chat other ideas, or if you want to expand on what you rank here in the chat, we welcome that as well. So there's somebody talking about a Center for Research, low environmental impacts. So really making sure whatever is done has those low environmental impacts. So here you can see the longer the colored bar means the more folks that are voting, or not voting, but identifying that as an important opportunity.
That's some pretty snappy graphics there.
So you can see the green technology that's the yellow bar in the middle. But education, arts and design, Dave mentioned what's called a maker district. A lot of industrial areas are introducing sort of those artists that use a little bit more machinery sometimes, or need the space to make their art, and that's on display in some of these industrial areas.
As somebody in the Community Advisory Committee mentioned, and I missed their point initially and then caught on, that with the internet as a way to sell goods to a very large audiences, that a place like Watsonville has an opportunity to support businesses that make stuff that gets sold to a much wider audience, via the internet.
And along those lines, I saw in the chat somebody talking about bridging the digital divide throughout the entire community. So before we start introducing big new tech, we need to ensure that everyone, or any new tech, right, can capitalize on anyone there's a digital divide within the community itself. So that's a good point.
Sure.
So definitely see a lot of support for these different ideas, particularly that idea of green technology.
I just want to highlight another interesting idea that was put in the chat too, in terms of it being Watsonville as an ideal place for R&D, noting the possible coordination or cooperation with some research or other institutions such as Cabrillo and UCAC for training and other opportunities given our industrial zone. So lots of good feedback coming in.
Yeah, this is amazing. Micro businesses also popped up there.
Yeah.
All right, so the next few slides are just more
farm to table
for thinking about. So we're not going to necessarily ask any specific questions on these, but as we move through the process, some of these ideas might come up more frequently. We've heard them from folks who have been talked about, or some of these are initiatives that are going on through the county and the area around, and may influence how we lay out and how we plan or how we lay out some land use alternatives and circulation alternatives. And maybe Justin, I'll have you talk a little bit about this one.
Certainly. One of the main things that we just want to highlight is our community right across the river from us and the connection between Watsonville and Pajaro. We have these two lines here just to highlight, two forms of connection. One, the roadway along the bridge, and the second one, the potential rail connection and trail as well. One thing to bear in mind is, of course, Pajaro is part of North Monterey County and not part of the city of Watsonville, even though we have strong connections between our two communities. And there's opportunities for how they can align. Those that may not be aware, TAMC, the Transportation Agency of Monterey County, a few years back prepared a plan for what they call their G12 corridor between Pajaro and Prunedale, and the kinds of improvements they want to move forward with along that corridor, everything from major roundabouts to some road diets, which are in the process of being funded and designed for the town of Pajaro. So those are things that are in the works, and we are cognizant of as we try to coordinate all those efforts. Separately, there's the rail corridor, and our agency in our county, the Regional Transportation Commission, is working on the design for the rail corridor through Watsonville and into Pajaro, which is shown on this next map. And likewise, up to the transit station, and then moving forward, TAMC is working on the actual transit station itself and getting the funding for designing what that's going to be like in the future. So there's a lot of things that are moving forward today that we're thinking about now as we try to help bridge that connection and provide better access for people living in both communities to across the river, as well as to the wider region with better transportation facilities and options down the road.
And I mean, because Pajaro is an important historic rail junction where the tracks that used to run from San Francisco to Monterey, which now run from Monterey up at least to Santa Cruz, intersect the main line coming from Southern California to Northern California, from Southern Pacific, later Union Pacific, going to Salinas. So there's just, there's a huge amount of potential in the longer term for there to be very significant rail access, passenger rail access to Pajaro and into Watsonville.
And on the next slide, maybe Justin, you can talk a little bit about the bigger regional plans that are going on that might impact Watsonville as well.
Certainly. There's a state rail transportation plan that's looking at not only our region, but across the entire state of where they're looking to improve transit, and particularly along our rail corridors. And so you'll note in the solid lines, those are existing rail services, and the dashed lines, those are proposed new or enhanced services. One of the key things to highlight is the one in green and blue. The one in blue is the proposed passenger rail that extends from Gilroy all the way to Salinas with a stop at Pajaro. It's currently in the works to make that connection between Gilroy and Salinas as a first phase, which is underway right now, and a second phase, which is securing the funding and the design, which is what I just spoke to in terms of a future phase of adding the Pajaro stop. So those are kind of how things work. Usually they don't do everything all at once. It takes some time and sometimes in larger phases. The other thing to highlight is the one in blue, and that is noting that high-speed rail is going to have a stop right across the mountains from here in Gilroy as it continues north towards San Jose and ultimately to San Francisco as well. That's going to provide a connection between North and Southern California with with high-speed rail service in under 2 hours, connecting those two major metropolitan regions. I think close to 100 miles of that has been built in the Central Valley. Work is being done right now to extend that into the Burbank area, and then future phases would extend further from Fresno through the Altamont Pass area and into Gilroy, and then ultimately San Jose and San Francisco. Obviously it's going to take many years to complete that effort, but just to highlight, these are things that are happening today. Many may not be cognizant of, but looking long range, we want to make sure that we're well positioned to take advantage of that in the future.
Right, so thinking about how that impacts land use decisions and long range planning, and just for context and future opportunities. And then we've talked about transit service on the next slide, just being able to implement faster, more reliable, easier access to bus transit. Those are things that are happening as well. And then we also you're lucky to be having at this, and at the same time, we're doing this general plan. On the next slide, it talks about parks and the opportunity to improve and expand Watsonville's parks and open space. We'll be addressing that through the general plan, but you also are beginning a park master plan as well. And we'll show some workshops that are coming up for that effort here as well. So that'll be happening. We'll be able to feed into that process for the general plan also. And then finally, one of the things that was identified during the 2030 plan, I think this is also during the 2030 plan, or Justin? Speaking,
Yes.
There were some areas for growth, so new development that were identified, and you can see those in all the different colored blocks there. The largest one being the yellow one, but there's some smaller ones as well. The purple one is identified as the area around the airport, not as much of a viable growth and development area for new housing now, as they may have thought it was at that time. But these are areas that we may be looking at as well, and maybe talking to folks about as well. So I know that there's Measure Q that came through that maybe Justin, you could talk a little bit about that in the context there, and then we won't spend too much time on this one, but.
Right. And so thinking back 20 years ago, Action for Harbor Value and then Measure U set forward not only urban growth limits, but areas where you thought we might accommodate more housing, more jobs. And those are primarily in the areas in sort of that purple area of Buena Vista, in that sort of lime green area in Atkinson Lane, and of course in the orange in the Manabe-Bergstrom, now referred to Manabe-Owl areas. The two ones towards the north were housing primarily, and the ones in the to the south around Watsonville Slough and the industrial zone was primarily for jobs. The concerns around Buena Vista is both the proximity to the airport and whether that can accommodate the housing that was envisioned at that time, as well as the cost of extending services and utilities to an area that's largely hilly and further afield from the city itself. And so that may not be considered as viable for accommodating more growth in the future as perhaps was envisioned at that time. The Atkinson Lane area also has had some development that has occurred over time in the county that has been annexed into the city. I'm talking about Pippin and what's under construction now in Pippin 2. So it doesn't have as much growth potential as, or at least some of that has already been realized. And so we'll be looking at what's left in terms of how that could occur over time. And so this informs what we anticipate will be areas where we might see incorporation to the city limits and accommodating, the housing need moving forward. And that's going to be tied very closely to the housing element process where we're looking at the site selection. This is where we're trying to anticipate where we think that housing can be accommodated in the near term and where that will go, and whether that informs we need to start be looking outside the city limits if we need additional areas for growth. So no decisions have been made there, but those are the topics that we're exploring at the moment.
And just to reinforce how much of everything we've talked about up till right on this slide is all existing area within the city. Those opportunities for infill and for transformation of existing places. So I saw a note in the chat on let's focus on infill first. And I think the city agrees that that's the strategy, right? To really figure out how do you transform existing places to make sure to see how much you can accommodate there. I saw a few notes on support for the transit and the impacts that may have. The rail and the transportation, but a desire for clean buses as well. So really thinking about, again, that tying back to that environmental sustainability ethic in everything that's done as well. And so let's go to our last question of the evening. So we've given you lots of different food for thought and things to think about, and you've given us twice as much to consider and to start to incorporate in. And we wanted to just give kind of last opportunity here for anything else that you would like to share in terms of the future of Watsonville. So something that maybe you haven't just came to you, maybe an idea that emerged out of some of those last few slides that were shared. Could be longer term than just in the 5 to 10 to 15 years if thinking down the future, but you could type in one new idea for the future of Watsonville that you might like the team to explore or like to explore with the community through this process. Any place, I'm seeing some more in the chat while people are thinking of their ideas. Many places to rebuild housing in the city. So it's not all infill, it may be renovations as well. More diverse housing. I see Beach Street has come up a couple of times.
Yeah.
Now we're seeing some community land trust, a Sam's or a Walmart where the Kmart used to be, high density housing along the electric train, encouraging people who work in Watsonville to live in Watsonville. So creating more opportunities for people to live where they work, rail oriented development, light rail, make the city beautiful and fun, destinations, see more light rail, high density.
Oh, keep Watsonville small town. How about that?
So we don't end up like Salinas or the Bay Area. So we could have a long conversation about what a small town is to different people too, what makes up those features of a small town.
Oh, we're going to get into that a lot.
Yeah. Arts venues, music, outdoor galleries, Fox Theater, culinary arts, more shopping, housing above retail. So that idea of that mixed use, a permanent urban growth boundary, help Watsonville, more shopping opportunities to create revenue. I see another more support for a Walmart or a Sam's Club or Sam's store. Closing the airport. Again, that's some back and forth that's happening in the chat. We're not going to be addressing that this evening, but certainly we will be talking about airport opportunities throughout the process and working with airport stakeholders as well.
Napa
Sustainable
River
careers, repurpose spaces to be mixed use instead of in local businesses. So we have some support for some chains, but also some support for small businesses. So room for possibly both. Affordable housing, solutions to homelessness, organic farming, Caltrans conversations, use the Napa River corridor as a model. Farm workers being crucial to this community. Tax incentives for condos. Making more art. We've heard art a couple times. Access to the beach. Build on something like the Santa Barbara Funk Zone. One-way street changes.
The area around the train station has a lot of potential for something not unlike the Funk Zone.
Awesome. These are terrific ideas. And I'm
Very,
seeing
very
more in the chat as well. Again, lack of farm worker housing again. Teacher-owned housing. An idea for teacher-owned housing. I see a Costco, Watsonville, kind of a all organic. I see another opportunity for Costco or Sam's Club, concert venue, increasing the height limits. So lots of great ideas. So keep them coming throughout this process. We do have, and we'll share the links to the online surveys that are out as well. But as we move into closing our workshop this evening, we do want to talk a little bit about some next steps. This has been so valuable, the amount of input that you've given us and the ability to start thinking about how do we develop some land use plans and circulation alternatives for you to react to, as well as just deeper conversations around many of these topics that need to be had. So Justin, I'll turn it back over to you for some next steps.
Thank you, Susan. Just want to highlight a few things. There's going to be, as we talked about earlier today, additional outreach opportunities. We have a survey that's out. So if you want to, you can take your phone and bring it up to those two what are called QR codes, and it will automatically open up a link that you click on, and it'll open the website for you to take the survey either in English or Spanish. And there's also going to be links on the website too that you can find on getting involved. You scroll down from the website, there's links for it too. So there's more than one way you can access this information. If you don't do that today, you can do that another time too. And feel free to email me directly at my email address or general.plan@watsonville.gov, and I can share it with you that way too if you have any trouble. Other upcoming events to know about. We're going to be at the Farmers Market on the 5th and the 13th, so this and the following Friday. And of course, Cinco de Mayo is coming up, and there's going to be an event at the Plaza on the 7th. And so we plan to be there too with a booth, opportunities to share information, get more feedback, take the survey, and so forth. We noted that there's a number of focus group meetings that are part of this effort. And we'll be reaching out to groups like the Farm Bureau, Wetlands Watch, housing developers, chambers of commerce, and more on getting their input too as what they see the future for Watsonville to become. And we also have public meetings coming up, one of which is going to be a broad overview of the outreach that's ongoing before the City Council on May 23rd. That's the third Tuesday of the month. And just to let you know that down the road, as we have developed a housing element and some alternatives for consideration in the general plan itself, we'll be going before a joint planning commission and city council meeting too. And that's likely going to be in the August or September timeframe. Key things we already highlighted before is, as part of the housing element, we're focused on opportunity sites and doing what's called the site selection process of the ability to accommodate housing as infill moving forward. And as I just mentioned before, that's going to inform some of our land use and circulation alternatives that we'll look out for later in the year, around the summer time and fall.
And if QR codes are not your thing, we did paste a couple times into the chat the links to the Spanish and English surveys. So if it's easier for you to access them that way, they're in the chat a couple different times. If you scroll up, you'll see them a few times.
Thank you. I'll go on to the next slide. If we have, just going over again, returning to the project schedule, we're at the very beginning of this. We really appreciate the wide turnout and all the input we've gotten so far. That this gives us a lot to work with as we want to make sure that we're considering all the range of topics as part of this general plan effort. I touched on previously, the project schedule, what to look out for in the summer and fall timeframe, but this is just to bring it up on the screen so you can have one more chance to look it over. This and other information I might add is on the city's website. We have a specific website. So if you go to community development, you'll see a link to the general plan update, and you can find this project schedule there, and we'll make sure to keep it up to date as things develop over time. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. I just wanted to highlight that we're coordinating with some of our other departments here at the city too. So the Parks Department is working on a facilities, assessing their existing facilities to better understand what the condition they're in and help prioritize what improvements they plan on making in the future. They have a couple of workshops. Just want to put a plug in for their workshops that are coming up not only later this week, but into next week where they're located. So we have 3 workshops at Pinto Lake, the City Plaza, and at Ramsey Park on the following dates. So if you would like to learn more and provide your input on existing park facilities and not only their conditions, but perhaps what improvements you would like to see there too, I just want to let you know that that's coming up too.
Great. And then Susie, since you opened us up, do you want to say any closing comments to close the workshop this evening?
Gosh, I think you guys have covered most of it, but I just again want to reiterate, thank you. I think the dialogue both with the Mentimeter as well as everything that everyone has shared in the chat, just great ideas, great feedback. Thank you for your engagement and enthusiasm tonight, and we look forward to working with all of you as we go through this process. So thank you.
Great. And as participants in tonight's workshop, you definitely will, if you can sign up on or you go to the website, you can get on the mailing list to be sure you find out anything that's happening in terms of the next workshops and meetings. So please make sure to do that as well. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you very much. This is great.
Have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you so much.
So much
This was a
for us
great
to think about.
presentation. Thanks.